Sometime many years ago, while I was teaching in Erie, Pennsylvania, my brother Pete called me. He was very distraught. He was in tears. He could hardly speak, and he asked me to speak to his teenage son, whom we call Little Pete. My brother was emotionally fragmented and could hardly speak to me because of the gravity of the situation. Little Pete was just about 17 or 18, and at that time he was deeply into drugs. My brother thought that because I was a priest, I would have the knowledge, the insight, and the expertise how to handle the situation. Well, we cried together in silence over the phone, and of course, I wasn't so naive, for I knew that I did not have the answer. I did not have the insight. I did not have the expertise. I did not have the knowledge how to approach the situation, especially since he was my nephew. I assured my brother Pete that I would speak to Little Pete, but that I really didn't expect too much to happen. After all, Little Pete, to Little Pete, I was just Uncle Joe, the guy who frolicked with him when he was a little child, and the guy who tickled him until tears came to his eyes, and the guy who played catch with him, the guy who cried when our Red Sox were having a bad year or laughed at something in the family. We were family, and I was very, very aware of that, just like Jesus in the gospel this morning. A prophet is not accepted in his own family. Remember a couple of weeks ago, the 10th Sunday of Ordinary Time, Jesus goes back, probably to have a rest, back to Nazareth with his friends, and they made fun of him. They called him terrible names. They thought that he was out of his mind. This is his family. At any rate, I had the opportunity to get back to Boston several times, talk to Little Pete. We just talked about family, the good times, the wonderful memories. He adored my mom, his grandma. He adored his aunts, Mary, Eleanor, Patricia, Anna. We shared our love for sports, did a lot of laughing, just talked about how much we love each other and how many faults we have, and yet we put up with each other. We talked about anything that would make us laugh or cry. We did not talk about drugs. But we continued the conversation for almost 2 years. Thank God, Little Pete turned the corner, got off drugs, turned into a good citizen, has a family, lives in Somerton, South Carolina now. He calls me 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes he'll call me twice a day. And he'll say, "Oh, I'm just calling to make you happy, Uncle Joe." He's now 65 years old. Not very long ago, he said to me, Uncle Joe, way back when I was on drugs, if you tried to talk to me about the evil of drugs and tried to persuade me in so many different ways to stop using drugs, I would not have listened to you. And I assured him, yes, Pete, I knew that. That is why I did not talk about drugs. And I said to myself, thank you, Jesus. No man, no woman is a prophet in his or her own town. Prophecy often goes unnoticed, if not rejected. Today's gospel introduces a new theme in Mark's gospel. the blindness of people to the power and the authority of Jesus. The people of Jesus' own town rejected his message, didn't appreciate who he was. They considered Jesus too much one of them to be taken seriously. They were too obsessed with superficialities, occupation, ancestry, origin, to realize God present in their midst and to be affected by the presence of God. Again, remember, the 10th Sunday of Ordinary Time. It's gospel. This is important for you and me. Jesus goes back to Nazareth. They ridicule him. He's out of his mind. The Galileans who heard Jesus' words were no better. They questioned his authenticity because they felt that they knew him too well. They thought that he was no better than anyone else, and why should he ask or act so superior? We so often resent people, all of us, you and I. We often resent people who can do what you and I cannot do. We so often resent people when the person is someone with whom we have grown up with, a member of the family or the community. Why do we so often reject the insightful ones among us? Remember the saying, what good comes from Nazareth? When they said that Jesus came from Nazareth, what good comes from Nazareth? This is practical, very practical application in this gospel for you and me today. You see those beams up there? Look at them. Look at those beams. They're covered nice with all kind of pretty stuff. Each of those beams weigh 48,000 pounds. Steve, the supervisor, shared that information with us. Some of us were standing in the back watching this massive crane put those I-beams up there. They were put into place by those cranes, and I'm telling you, very, very brave men. You know what's holding those beams up there? Little bolts, about 4 inches long, maybe 4 inches long, and a little welding at each end. And while we, myself and some members of the staff, were watching those people put those beams up there, I felt like shouting out, hey, wait a minute, get a bigger bolt. 4 inches isn't going to do the job. But I kept my mouth shut. I don't do that enough, I guess. Because I was aware of those men up there, those engineers, the supervisor, knew more than I will ever know about beams and bolts and engineering. I respected their knowledge, their professionalism, their expertise. But why do we so often reject the knowledge, the professionalism of other people? Jesus must have asked himself this question in the gospel this morning. A few years ago, I had a serious bout with kidney stones, precisely 4 times. Around that time, I was implementing a new facet in our liturgical celebrations. Very seemingly almost insignificant, small addition to the liturgy. And after one of the masses, as we were sharing coffee and donuts in the parish hall, a couple came up to me and tore into me like two rattlesnakes. She was a nurse at the local hospital, and he an engineer for the Bureau of Reclamation. I have to give myself some credit, even to this day, for the way I handled their vitriol. I asked her, "Do you remember a couple of weeks ago, the paramedics carried me out of my house at 2 a.m. I was giving birth to a kidney stone. You were on duty that morning in the hospital, 2 o'clock in the morning. You greeted me so graciously, with assurance and tenderness. You were so professional, you were so kind, you made me feel good. Well, tell me, did I tell you how to do your job? Did I tell you how to insert that needle into my vein? I probably would have suggested, give me a little more of that morphine, it's doing the job. I don't think I did. I respected who you are and who you were at that moment and your profession, and indeed appreciated your expertise as a nurse in the ER. Then I turned to her angry husband, and with my Italian charm, politely assured him that I never offered him any suggestions how to run the engineering department in the Bureau of Reclamation. I asked both of them, why is it that I sincerely respect and appreciate your vocation, but you don't appreciate my expertise, my vocation, my professionalism? I assured them that I am not a nurse, I am not an engineer, but I am a liturgist. And I read articles about liturgy and books about liturgy. And I read the liturgical documents that come out of Rome. I am a professional. I was ordained and educated to do this stuff. Why don't you respect that? I asked them. I then took a bite of my donut and walked away. It's stuff like this that Jesus had to deal with. What courage he must have had, and how he must have been hurt. Courage. Wow. On national news this past Tuesday, it was reported that an Episcopalian cathedral in the eastern part of our country built a chain link fence in the prominent place of the cathedral and put 3 statues in the cage. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the Holy Family. And the journalist asked the pastor, how long are you going to keep this cage there? And the pastor said, when all those immigrant families are once again united. He did not worry about the reaction of the people. He and his informed liturgical committee decided to do this, to send a symbolic message to the community. Now that is courage. There are prophets, there are saints among us in your own families, believe it or not. And in their lives of quiet integrity, their courage, their generosity, they mirror the Jesus of the gospel. In embracing discipleship, because you come to this altar, because you receive the Eucharist, doesn't necessarily mean that you have embraced discipleship. We embrace discipleship when we take on the role of a prophet and say things that perhaps other people don't want to hear. To live our Christian lives is to proclaim the word we have heard. And there's a big price to that. It can result in being ostracized, ridiculed, rejected, isolated. But genuine faith never falters in conviction that the justice of God will triumph over all injustice, that the mercy of God will triumph over all hatred, that the light of God will triumph over the darkness of sin and death. Remember this. Each of us is responsible for what we say. And each of us is responsible for what we don't say. Don't be afraid.